all of us architects and urbanists are trying to add density to LA, which, is plagued by this issue of having been downzoned in the 70s and the 80s to be more single-family residential right when the population has been exploding. I think the city went from zone for 30 million and they downzoned it to like 10 or something, and we're actually 20, so we have a homeless problem. This is what the neighborhood's like. It's just a whole bunch of bungalows and miscellaneous houses. It's distinguished by the crazy hills. The lot size is not enormous, but we really wanted to have it feel like just kind of being part of that larger texture, like differentiated houses. So the goal was building 18 units of housing on what was 5, but also making it look like they were sort of part of the larger context that was existing. This was originally 5 individual lots, and there was a couple of houses, 2 of which were abandoned. One was semi-inhabited and there was 1 empty lot. And someone had actually bought them all together and decided to use something called the Small Lot Ordinance, which is an LA-specific idea about building lots into smaller pieces so that you can increase density in LA. Generally, when people do small lots, they do sort of a very simple, almost like kind of railroad cars, like 2 rows, parking garages below and 2 levels above it. And we wanted to try and do something special that was more contextual with the neighborhood. And so one of the ideas that we used is this idea of stealth density. Because the small lot ordinance only requires you to be like 6 or 8 inches apart from each other, but still you're an individual house that you can get like a real individual mortgage on. So this one is an interesting one because this is actually 3 houses, but it kind of looks like 2. But they're 3 individual houses with individual mortgages. They own the land that they're on. They're just a much smaller house size, but without giving up a lot of the amenities of having single family house. That's sort of how the small lot can work. So the whole complex, the whole thing's built around this courtyard, which is like a parking courtyard, but it also doubles as a space for like gathering. So it's sort of like a place that kids can ride their bike, and there's an idea of the living street that's sort of popular in Japan and in the Netherlands, where when the cars are gone to work during the day, then the space becomes something else. So we really did a lot of landscaping here, and you can see how these houses work now. So you have these triple houses, which are 3 individual houses. But one of the really fun things is that everybody does face into this courtyard, and the way we designed it is each unit has a kitchen that faces the courtyard. So you have that sense of community in a way that you kind of know, like if people are coming or going, or everybody seems to get to know their neighbors really easily. At the end is a row of 3 houses that are kind of more like lofts. So the yellow doors are the kitchen doors to those units. These are all duplexes, so each person who owns a house, they're going to enter down their own staircase to their entry point. Like this is someone's entry, and so their kitchen is right here.
It is interesting that you took a look at the land and said, we're not just going to build 15 houses or 15 apartments, or it was...
Yeah, well, the challenge was to not just go and like level something and build like these railroad things, which actually doesn't really work that well on a hill. Like the hill maybe begat the opportunity, like the challenging topography. We were inspired by things like Sea Ranch too, where you're kind of like looking at buildings in the land and that they kind of are speaking to the bigger context. But yeah, so something like this. So this kind of very simple concrete stair has the front door to both this house and this house, but over there where the trash cans are, you can see there's a gap, and that's the space between the 2 houses. And so legally, it allows them to legally exist as independent houses and not condominiums, because condominiums have a whole nother bunch of issues and different mortgage types and so on. So these are more like traditional house products, but much, much denser than would be traditionally the case in a single family. It's certainly the California single family house idiom, but everybody does have their own individual outdoor space.
So you're saying that they're actually, what did you have to do to make it legal?
The small lot has a minimum of, I think, 6 or 8 inches between houses. And so there is an 8-inch space between the 2. Houses are completely independent, so there's nothing in between that gap there. That allows them to have this legal entity as an individual house, which the way California rules work is kind of important for mortgages and stuff. So even like these, the white metal ones have it as well. You can see like that white strip down the middle.
It just feels like such an oasis back here. I find it so interesting that you had to do stealth density. That you couldn't, I mean, that's a bad thing.
Yeah. In this case, like the stealth density idea is like this, if this looks like 2 houses, but it's actually 3, like that I thought was kind of fun. And it's a way to look at it that you know, people just make assumptions. Like if it was just a big box, it would look very different. But we had a lot of neighborhood opposition even for this, which I think generally raised, oh, you can't believe how many public hearings I had to go to. And it was because like, oh my gosh, any density. You know, we're in a neighborhood with, you know, dingbat apartments with like 6 units across the street, but people are like, this is gonna ruin our neighborhood and add too much traffic and stuff. And that's just, it's become a typical American refrain. And it's why, you know, you don't really want to have it be a one person, one project at a time, 5-year fight, because it makes it less likely that anyone's going to bother making the effort to increase density. What's nice is that with these roof lines, it's framed the way that the roofs work. So these houses, which are pretty narrow, to be honest, they're kind of like an Amsterdam width building, but they all have really high ceilings on the top floors. So you can use the space of those higher frames to really bring a lot of air and light into the buildings. These are the single family house units. So there's 3 of those. There's 2 triplexes and a bunch of actually 3 triplexes. But you can see like in these big windows, these are very simple industrial storefront windows, and we used that throughout and it allowed us to get much bigger openings, you know, without it really costing that much money.
The landscaping and the trees are probably this big when it started.
No, it did change a lot over the years. I mean, it's really grown in nicely. What's nice too is that because the people who live here really like it, so people really take care of stuff. And all right, so this is sort of like a typical, so you can see these buildings are even at an angle to each other. And again, that's sort of giving you the more picturesque kind of house to house, you know, there's sort of space between. And that was such a great opportunity for landscape too. So this house has a little front porch. Some of them have gardens, but this has like a little porch on the street. But you can kind of sit outside here because these bigger single family houses don't have outdoor space on the back. And you can see up here like the kind of expanse of the windows is pretty large, and intentionally there's these different kinds of trees that give it sort of screening, but it's also, you know, you're kind of gonna have your windows open at night that way. And should we just go in? Okay. Hi, you guys. Okay. Whew, we're doing the whole tour. So this is a typical floor plan for one of the single family houses, and mostly it's like an open combination living room, dining room. And in all of them, there's the kitchen, which always faces into the kind of communal parking area. Like just this idea that you kind of just can survey your neighborhood without, I think, hopefully being like Mrs. Kravitz, you know, and Bewitched or whatever. But then these are very simple, like all the kitchens are similar, where there's a very simple island and the sinks are always facing the window. So it's a pantry.
It's kind of celebrating the fact that you have neighbors.
Yeah, no, it's like we're in a neighborhood, but you have enough privacy. I mean, if you were like, I don't want to see anybody, you can just keep your shades down, or you can film your windows or whatever. But Susan has been like, I'm just going to keep it open, you know, which works out okay. Like the tree that's outside this window or the little courtyard is pretty good outdoor space, and it's mostly what you need. It does work. And then so the bookcases, all the houses also have like a bookcase that's sort of part of the staircase. And the ceiling height and the light in the stair, it makes it volumetrically so much more complex and large. So even though the footprints aren't that large, it feels super spacious. So like you have a little room here that's like the home office, which I feel like everybody needs a little home office. The laundry is like hidden, and then this house actually has 3 bedrooms. So like the footprint for this bedroom is not that big, but it's pretty great because of that ceiling, you know. So cubic, if you measured it in terms of cubic volume, it's very good. And then the windows are so dramatic that it's pretty nice, I think. So
was the window one of the bigger expenses?
No, they're the cheapest things. In fact,
this is still the commercial.
Well, you cannot do those kind of windows without doing it in commercial, yeah. So there's another bedroom. The primary bedroom is really spacious as well. And this one does have more of that view. In this case, Like this is Echo Park Hills and Dodger Stadium's over there where the palm tree row is. But you start to feel like you're in a tree house, you know.
So tell me about the windows. I mean, why do people not use these more?
They're not, I mean, this whole set is actually literally from a storefront company, which would be atypical. Like when we were doing this project, actually the contractors were speccing a kind of more generic mass domestic brand. And we were able to cut like, I think 125,000 off the whole project cost by switching to this industrial situation.
Yeah, just having the window go all the way to the floor just feels like you're stepping right there.
Yeah. And then all of the bathrooms, we just did it very simple. You know, these are kind of shaker pulls that probably cost like $2, but because they're large and unusual, they become more pop art. And like instead of subway tile, it's like an oversized subway tile. So just really simple stuff, but nothing that costs a lot of money, you know. And actually even using wood floors everywhere is much cheaper than doing tile floors.
You know, even changing up the roofs. Tell me about that, like making that decision not to kind of make everything uniform.
That's sort of like a super graphic, larger picture thing where we really wanted to have it feel like differentiated houses, but we didn't want to get sort of kitschy where it's like each thing's a different color, but rather just have like two ways of doing it. One's the clad metal standing seam walls and roofs, and then the other ones are black fiber cement board that's painted. So that was sort of something that we designed almost at a sculptural level. There's like I would say there's a whole sort of sculptural side of it in the beginning that really set up the complexity of how the buildings related to each other, what they looked like, you know, what the languages were. It doesn't cost more to build it necessarily, it's just kind of more thoughtful.
Because it makes sense economically to build this way. I mean,
well, these were built quite inexpensively, but I think because there was a lot of TLC, and it did take a while to get through the NIMBYism and stuff like that, but they actually much exceeded their expectations for how much they would sell for because they were really nice.
This is great, though. This is such a great example of how, you know, a city can really be more attractive.
Yeah, no, and it's so much better for living because you can you actually know your neighbors. You're like, you know, I hurt my ankle. Will you take me to the ER? Like, you could just go like, hey, you. You know, I think it's so much less isolating than the suburbs. But what's nice is doing projects like this. It starts to show ways that you could have density that people are like, oh, actually, that's really nice, or I would live there, as opposed to maybe the more generic developer supermaxed thing, which then often isn't like necessarily improving a neighborhood as much as it could. And so I guess I'm technically a YIMBY, so why not try to add a little more design time in the front end to make a better community building.